And there's Luisa. Margarita. No. Luisa. Luisa, mucho gusto. Sí, Alice. Mucho gusto. Acá en la parte delantera, por favor.
Hola, soy Carol.
Mucho gusto.
Hola. ¿Perdón?
¿Será portugués?
¿En qué idioma va a ser el panel?
Va a ser casi completamente en inglés, excepto por que me dijeron que hay traductor. Entonces yo intentaré traducir al mismo tiempo, ¿verdad? Hay que crear soluciones juntos. Perfecto, nos falta un panelista. Oh, entonces tú vas a traducir. Okay. Hi, everyone. It's so good to see you all. And there is Giorgio. Giorgio is joining us at the end of the table. You can finish eating. This is a safe space. Okay, we'll get started just for the sake of time, and folks will file in. As you all probably heard, I'm going to do my best to translate English and Spanish, and then Carol is going to translate Portuguese to English for you all, and we're just going to have a good time. So, buenas tardes a todos. Hi, everybody. Thank you all so much for joining us at the Global Progressive Mobilization and for choosing to spend the next 45 minutes with us here talking about the most creative, innovative, and impactful strategies to defend and promote democracy in Latin America. The story of democracy in Latin America is a complicated one right now. There is backsliding across the region, there is strain in the region, there is economic strife in the region, testing of institutions and systems. As we're seeing around the world, Latin America is a mix of economic frustration, political polarization, and amazingly, of hope, mobilization, and people-powered change. Over the last 2 years, voters across the region have rewarded candidates that have run on hard insecurity, being more market-friendly, and anti-establishment platforms. But let's be clear, voters are not clearly aligning with one ideology or another. Voters are aligning around a vision that guarantees them security, sovereignty, and delivery. So it's not a wave of conviction, it is a demand for change and good governance, which is why it is so exciting that we're here today with this panel. I'm joined by 5 wonderful panelists. The first is Claudia Ortiz. She is a member of the Chamber of Deputies in El Salvador and is currently the leading voice of the democratic opposition in the country. A tough job, I think we'd all agree. Then, Dandara Tonantzin. Y Dandara, me dices si pronuncié bien tu apellido. She is a federal deputy from Brazil, and she is a leading voice on affirmative action and social inclusion in the country. Giorgio Jackson, who is joining us on stage now, is the executive director of the Pan American Congress, a platform dedicated to fostering progressive hemispheric cooperation on climate change, migration, and democratic resilience. And his fingerprints are all over the political strategy in Latin America, from Chile and across the region. Luisa Gonzalez is a prominent Ecuadorian lawyer, politician, and leading figure of the citizen revolution movement. She is a 2-time presidential candidate, and she is recognized for her advocacy of social justice in Ecuador. And Mina Amiga, Carol, serves as the executive director of Instituto Update, where she leads the organization's narrative strategy and efforts to strengthen democracy across Latin America. So, welcome, friends. Bienvenidas, amigas y amigos. Empecemos con una pregunta súper sencilla. Cuéntanme a dónde está la democracia en su país y cómo ustedes están trabajando para protegerla. Tell me a little bit about democracy within your own context and your work to promote it. Let's start with Claudia, and when we have a speaker that speaks in Spanish, I will translate right after they're done. 2 minutes. Of course.
Hello, everybody. Greetings from El Salvador. I come from a country which tried to build democracy in 1992, but we failed because after the peace agreements, after the civil conflict in El Salvador, democracy was supposed to be built, and democracy is supposed to deliver to people, to address the causes that lead us to a civil conflict or a civil war. But elites, political and economic elites in El Salvador, they failed building a national and a collective project for our nation. And our democracy was born, but it was unnourished. It remained ill, and it was very easy to kill it. And now we're not more in a democracy, we are in a dictatorship, a short-term dictatorship, 5, 4, 6 years, but we are with all the threats of a dictatorship. What are we doing? Well, we're trying to change the focus from the authoritarian to the people. Because as long as there is people, there is hope. As long as there is people, there is a sovereign power. So in El Salvador, we are resisting, indeed, but also we are trying to change our focus, not in the authoritarian, not to make the authoritarian the protagonist of the narrative, but to make the people. And what people need, food, public health, public education, and so many other things. In El Salvador, there's only one thing in which government is delivering in very shady ways, security, but in any other aspect, they are not delivering for the people. And I think that's a great opportunity, and that's a great struggle that we have to face. So that's how democracy is in El Salvador. Thank you very much.
Over to our two Brazilians to give us a perspective from both civil society and in the legislature.
So, democracy in Brazil, it's a daily negotiation over who gets to be seen as a political subject. At Institute Update, we start from a structural premise that you cannot defend democracy while excluding more than half the population from power. So women in Brazil are 52% of Brazil's electorate, and black Brazilians are the majority of the population as well. And yet our legislative houses look nothing like the country that they claim to represent. So our fight for democracy is this. We are building this infrastructure and the training, the networks, the data, the narrative tools, so that diverse leaders, such as Dandara, don't just survive in politics, but they shape it. And we know this from evidence that it's women who sustain democracy. It's women who time and again hold the line against authoritarian advance in the ballot box, in the streets, at the homes, where women are more politically engaged and represented. We know democratic institutions can be more resilient as well. So that means our work has to operate in two fronts simultaneously. First, with the women who want to run, who carry a political vocation and need information, resource, and networks to turn that into viable candidacy. And second, with the women who vote, thinking about their daily lives, so about the price of food, about their children's safety, about whether they will make it to the end of the month. So these are not separate publics, and they are the same democratic force at different points in the same journey. But we also know what happens to the women who do get elected. They face an enormous amount of gender-based political violence, threats, harassment, institutional sabotage, and this is specifically brutal for black women in Brazil who are targeted with a specific and relentless ferocity. So since the assassination of Marielle Franco, every black woman who steps into political life in Brazil knows the stakes are not just symbolic. The threats are real, and this violence is structural. And the message being sent is deliberate. You do not belong here. So that is precisely why we need a very well-connected ecosystem, not just candidates, not just isolated organizations, but a coordinated infrastructure of support, protection, and solidarity that allows these women to advance without having to fight alone. That is what we are trying to do at the Update Institute. I will pass to Dandara, and I will help her trying to translate from Portuguese to English.
Thank you. Bom dia. Palmas. Bom dia, é uma alegria estar aqui. Me chamo Dandara e sou deputada federal no Brasil.
So she's Dandara, and she's a federal deputy from Brazil. She's from the state of Minas Gerais.
Nós vivemos no Brasil um cenário muito intenso de polarização política.
So in Brazil, we are living a really polarized scenario at the moment.
E foi fortalecido a partir de uma rede que se estruturou para enfrentar um golpe contra a presidenta Dilma, legitimamente eleita, e de lá para cá as disputas se intensificaram.
So since Dilma was elected, there is a force against democracy, and since then we are trying to fight to have the democracy alive in Brazil.
Nós estamos entendendo que nesse momento a disputa ela não é mais só eleitoral ou institucional, é uma disputa constante de valores, de mundo e de concepções.
So at the moment we are understanding that we are not only fight for institutional politics, but also for values and democracy in our lives, and a way that we are seeing the world.
Nós estamos num quinto governo democrático e popular, é algo muito recente para a nossa democracia ter governos progressistas.
It's only the fifth time that we have a democratic government in Brazil, so it's really recent, and we are still learning about it.
Todos os índices da economia do presidente Lula estão melhorando. O desemprego, o combate à fome, o combate à desigualdade.
And Lula is showing a good index in economy and workforce and the fight against inequality as well.
E mesmo assim, nas pesquisas eleitorais, o filho do Bolsonaro, o Flávio Bolsonaro, aparece empatado com o presidente Lula.
And even still, Flávio Bolsonaro, the son of Bolsonaro, former president of Brazil, is still running really close to Lula in the elections.
E vocês sabem que nós tivemos um fato inédito no Brasil. Pela primeira vez na história, generais 4 estrelas foram condenados por tentativa de golpe à nossa democracia.
And it was the first time that we have generals being accused against democracy.
Mas nem com a condenação e a prisão dos golpistas, a extrema-direita ou as ideias autoritárias foram enterradas.
Even though these ideas, these authoritarian ideas, didn't disappear from our society.
O nosso mandato é trincheira de luta no Congresso Nacional. Nós atuamos na lógica pé dentro, pé fora.
She's saying that her mandate works as a space inside and out the politics to combat and against these authoritarian forces.
Se a disputa é de valores, não adianta fazer só disputa institucional.
Because if we are disputing values, it couldn't be only institutional spaces.
Por isso, o presidente Lula, de forma muito corajosa, está encampando a luta pelo fim da escala 6x1. No Brasil, ainda são 6 dias de trabalho para 1 dia de descanso. E nós estamos construindo mobilizações populares para pressionar o Congresso. Essa proposta tem hoje mais de 70% de aprovação.
She's saying that that's why Lula is going forward with a proposal against the work scale that today is you have to work 6 days and rest 1, and we are trying to change this. So Lula is championing this fight to pressure Congress, and more than 70% of people in Brazil approve it.
O nosso desafio é conectar a democracia com a vida do povo.
So what Dandara is saying is really similar to what I was saying, that is that our challenge is to connect democracy with our daily lives.
Porque em muitos lugares do Brasil a democracia ainda não chegou.
Because in most part of the Brazil, they don't have democracy still.
A democracia não pode ser algo distante, um ser inanimado que ninguém conhece.
And democracy cannot be something like strange that no one knows about.
A luta pela redução da jornada de trabalho sem redução dos salários é uma luta grande da democracia.
So this fight, this work week reform that we are trying to do is...
A luta pela redução da jornada é uma luta da democracia.
So this work week reform is also a democracy fight.
Para finalizar, a nossa grande atuação para defender a democracia esse ano é reeleger o presidente Lula.
So our main fight this year is to re-elect Lula president of Brazil.
Vocês sabem o papel que o presidente Lula também.
And also women like Dandara, who is fighting for us as well at the Federal Congress.
Vocês sabem o papel que o presidente Lula cumpre para o mundo, e eu não tenho dúvida que as eleições do Brasil esse ano serão as eleições mais importantes do campo progressista do planeta.
So the Brazilian elections this year will be the most important elections that we have all around the world. As we all know, the force of Lula all over, and how important for democracy and for Latin America it is to get Lula reelected.
Nós vamos sofrer interferências não só do Trump e dos Estados Unidos, mas da extrema-direita global.
And we know that Trump and all the global far right will try to intercede in the president elections.
Então, o presidente Lula me pediu para eu vir participar desse espaço para convocar todo o nosso campo progressista global a se engajar e contribuir de alguma forma. Nós devemos isso à nossa luta e à história do presidente Lula.
So Lula asked her to come here and say that we need all of you together with us in Brazil this year to get him reelected, and we need to do this for Lula and for the progressive movements all over.
Luisa, tú primero y yo lo traduzco al inglés.
Gracias. No, yo lo tengo.
Tú lo haces y yo
Lo hago todo y luego, de acuerdo, gracias. La democracia no solo se garantiza por celebrar elecciones. Soy Luisa González, ex candidata a la presidencia de la República de Ecuador en 2023 y 2025. Y para ubicarnos en el contexto geopolítico, Ecuador tiene una de las economías más pequeñas en Latinoamérica, pero siendo un país de apenas 18 millones de ciudadanos, es el principal puerto por el que sale el 70% de la droga que va al mundo. Y nos hemos convertido en uno de los países más inseguros del mundo, el más inseguro de Latinoamérica, y de las 10 ciudades más violentas del mundo, 5 están en Ecuador. El narco ha permeado el Estado y el actual presidente, Daniel Noboa, ha permitido que esto ocurra, incluyendo el hecho de que sus empresas de exportación, en ellas se ha incautado grandes cantidades de cocaína. Y estos hechos no se han investigado y en muchos casos se han archivado sin que se llegue a concluir responsables siquiera. Ecuador ha tenido un retroceso drástico en lo institucional y un resquebrajamiento del Estado de Derecho con un impacto directo en la democracia del país. Y ha sido organizado esto desde el mismo presidente de la República, dado que Daniel Noboa, presidente actual, es quien controla el sistema judicial, jueces, fiscales y las instituciones que deberían velar por el ejercicio democrático. De ahí se ha llevado a cabo una persecución judicial y política a líderes políticos y sociales en el Ecuador. En resumen, Ecuador está convirtiéndose a pasos acelerados en un régimen autoritario y dictatorial. Quienes levanten sus voces de manera crítica al régimen, al presidente Noboa, a su círculo, a su gestión, son amenazados, perseguidos o encarcelados. Ejemplo, 2 alcaldes de las principales ciudades del país, uno encarcelado, otro allanado ilegalmente su domicilio. Y yo misma, como líder de la oposición perteneciente a la Revolución Ciudadana, recibo amenazas contra mi vida y ahora mismo amenazas de que en cuanto yo llegue al Ecuador seré encarcelada. Y muchos podrían decir, pero si no hay un proceso o la justicia o algo, pues en el Ecuador ya no hace falta. Fiscalía dice que ha recibido una denuncia anónima y mientras se investiga tú vas preso y luego se probará cualquier responsabilidad. Es decir, al no haber un Estado de Derecho tampoco existe presunción de inocencia. La organización política que yo represento, que es la más grande e importante del Ecuador, que además es de oposición, la Revolución Ciudadana, ha sido suspendida de manera ilegal de participar en las próximas elecciones por 9 meses. Absolutamente fuera del marco legal nos suspenden nuestra organización de cara a las elecciones locales y regionales. Nuestra organización política lidera la mayor parte de alcaldías y prefecturas, que son los gobiernos regionales en el Ecuador. Y frente a esto nos sacan del juego electoral. De manera ilegal, habiéndose ya aprobado un calendario electoral, pues a nosotros nos adelantan las elecciones y cambian las fechas. Esto no solo pasa contra la Revolución Ciudadana, pasa contra cualquier persona que levante su voz en contra del régimen actual, pero también contra líderes de izquierda, oposición y otros partidos políticos a los que están amenazados de borrarles del registro electoral, ¿no? De proscribirlos. Por eso, no siempre ir a las elecciones significa vivir en democracia, cuando por otra vía te eliminan o te proscriben. Gracias.
All right, bear with me as I do my best, Luisa, and try to do this well for her. So democracy doesn't exist just because you have elections. This is Luisa Gonzalez. She was a candidate for president in Ecuador in 2023 and 2025. To give you a little bit of context, Ecuador has one of the smallest economies in South America. It has 18 million, there are 18 million people in its population, but it is responsible for 70% of the cocaine distribution around the world. As a result, Ecuador has spent at least a decade being one of the least secure countries and one of the most violent countries in the world. Of the 10 top most violent countries on the planet, 5 are in Ecuador. Drug trafficking, it has permeated the state, and current President Daniel Noboa has allowed this to happen, including allowing it to happen within businesses that he's affiliated with. Ecuador has had a drastic breakdown of its institutions and systems and of human and civil rights, impacting the country as a result of Daniel Noboa's control over the judicial, fiscal, policy, and executive systems. Because of this, in Ecuador, it is incredibly easy to persecute judicial and political leaders. Ecuador is becoming every day more dictatorial and more authoritarian. Those who dare to raise their voices in a way that criticizes the regime at all are threatened, persecuted, or jailed. 2 mayors in some of the largest cities in Ecuador are either jailed or their houses have been raided under false charges. Luisa herself, as leader of the opposition, has had threats against her life, including threats that keep her from returning to Ecuador, where if she sets foot inside of the country, she will be jailed immediately. In Ecuador, you don't need to commit a crime to be jailed. There is no presumption of innocence. The organization that Luisa presents is one of the biggest and most important in Ecuador, and the leader of the opposition, La Revolución Ciudadana. It's been suspended for more than 9 months under illegal and unclear conditions to try to ensure that they do not participate in regional and local elections, while at the same time leading in the polls in those same elections. This isn't just happening to her party. There are other political parties that are progressive or on the left that are also at risk of being persecuted or denied their rights to participate in elections. That's the reason why Luisa's message here today is that just because you have elections doesn't mean you're living in a democracy. There are other ways to get rid of your opposition, and it's important that we talk about that today.
Okay. Thanks, Ali, for your invitation to this panel. I know that it's kind of strange here in Spain, everybody talking in English, but it's because the Center for American Progress invited us to do this panel in English. So, and I'm thrilled to be in a panel with a lot of women leaders. The common thing in the panels is there are a lot of men and a little amount of women. So it's very good to have a panel with a lot of women. I come from Chile. Our current context is that we had just 1 month of a new government. I participate in the previous government from Gabriel Boric, who is going to be also giving some opening remarks tomorrow. And we had a very tough context because we in Chile in 2019, we have this social outburst. And after that, we had a constitutional process, basically 2 constitutional processes that were failed, both of them. One was a progressive leader proposal, and the other was and was rejected, and the other was a very conservative proposal and was also rejected. So it's a tough context now in Chile. I think that the government had really great achievements in the last 4 years. Of course, we made mistakes and a lot of tough situations with the expectations overall, but we had a mining royalty, a pension reform, an historical increase on the minimum wage, a reduction of the working from 45 hours a week to 40 hours a week. We have an enforced alimony for the children and for the women who doesn't know where their parents are with the money that they should support for the children. And now we have this far-right government who has in their own cabinet one of the main lawyers from Pinochet, is the Minister of Defense. And we have also our new chancellor is the right wing from the last 30 years, from the most billionaire man in Chile. So the amount of conflict of interest and difficulties from this cabinet with a very low experience on politics in general, but a lot of conflict of interest is very high, and they are following the receipt of Steve Bannon, flooding the zone, absolutely, the first months. But I also want to share with you that they also made a lot of mistakes. They are very good at campaigning, but in these first months, they are not proving for the Chilean people that they are good at governing, And the polls now, the opinion polls, said that they have dropped, the support. They started like near to 60% of support, and now they're in the mid of 30, 35, maybe 38% of approval rates in less than 1 month. So I think that many times the right wing is good at making campaign because they trigger this fear emotion, but not necessarily they offer good solutions. Now the main project that the government of President Cast is showing to the country is a project called National Reconstruction, but that's only something, a cover-up for the, tax reform, a very regressive tax reform that returns 1% of the GDP to the, less than 1% of the richest in Chile. And that's their main goal, and the frame is that they will have like this trickle-down economy. They will, if we get the taxes down for our friends, for our people who funded our campaigns, there is going to be more employment. There is going to be like a promise of a better future. So we are now trying to, gather the opposition, because of course it's difficult to manage a coalition that is diverse. But I think that the threat of going back to a more regressive, tax system, and also to affect, the social rights that we have built these last 10, maybe 15 years with mobilizations, with different governments that had tried to advance a little bit more in social rights. This could be a massive, step back. And in the same way of Milei and in the same way of Trump, they're trying to put all their agenda, all their program in one bill, like the big beautiful bill, or in Argentina the same omnibus bill, and they are trying to follow the same recipe. And I hope that the opposition parties, I hope they act together, trying to stop this madness of giving back like 1 point of GDP to the richest in our country. So that's the context of Chile, and maybe we can have one more question very fast.
Yes, of course. Thank you to all of our panelists for providing us context here. We'll do one question each, and then we'd love to leave some time for questions from you all. So we'll go very quickly. Giorgio, to your point around governance, let's talk a little bit about El Salvador. So, Claudia, President Bukele has said he wants to govern El Salvador for maybe 10 years. We just saw the defeat of Orban in Hungary after 16 years. These timelines, these power grabs are often built on illiberal changes to constitutions, but they're also built on this false sense of delivery and false sense of keep me around for 10 years and I'm going to make your life better over those 10 years. Do you think El Salvador will have a democracy in 10 years? And what are you doing right now to get there, hopefully sooner than that?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Ali. Well, I think the most important question maybe is not if El Salvador will have democracy in 10 years. I really hope so, and we are working very hard to manage to do it. But I think the most important question is what democracy we want to build. I want to take a few moments to say what is happening in El Salvador right now. What is the Salvadorian model? And I never say the guy's name because I don't want to feed his trademark. And we don't have to, focus on the authoritarians. We need to focus on the people. So what's happening right now in El Salvador, and what's the Salvadorian model? First of all, the Salvadoran model is not a good model for other Latin American countries. And I deeply regret about the reality that it's happening in Ecuador, for example, or in Chile, because two out of the three most stable democracies in Latin America, Costa Rica, Chile, the other one is Uruguay, they have won, recent presidents have won elections campaigning that they're going to do the same as is being done in El Salvador. Mm-hmm. But you don't have anything to learn from Salvadorian model, which is, everybody's talking about security, but security at what cost? Agreements with gangs, which is very documented by journalism in a recent Frontline documentary that I invite you all to watch, that tells about agreements with gangs that led to a massacre. When the agreement broke, we had a massacre. In 72 hours, 80 people were murdered by gangs. And after that, the government managed to launch a state of exception. And we have now 4 years with 3 of our constitutional guarantees suspended. One of them is the right of defense, right? So we don't have either due process. But what other things? This has led to crimes against humanity. We had recently a report about an international and independent law experts that they concluded that in El Salvador they might be committed crimes against humanity, like tortures under custody, death under custody, and so many other things. What happens now in El Salvador? There is an absolute repression to civil society, to journalism, and this context also makes that citizenship is being auto-censoring themselves. So political participation and civil society participation is being very damaged right now. The party system has collapsed as well. In El Salvador, we had traditional parties, the left party, the right party, and they were big parties. Now in El Salvador, there isn't big parties and small parties. There are all small parties and one big party that they use all the public resources to campaign and to launch propaganda every single day. So we have a lot to rebuild regarding democracy. But I think it's important to say that what are we doing? We are trying to rebuild the conversation. And it's important to say that there is a group of people, they have a very incorrect theory of change. How are we going to have democracy? We don't need to have democracy again, the same kind of democracy that we had in the last decades. We need to build a new kind of democracy, a democracy based on people's needs, democracy based on dignity, democracy that is based on the delivery of the state. Because there is a reason why humans organize politically around a state, right? And it's not to make some group richer. It's not for that, right? It's to deliver results and a better life for people. So some people think that we're going to have democracy again if all the opposition parties, they make a coalition and they go to elections. That's not going to happen. Latin American context is very particular regarding democratic institutions. What will lead us to democracy is if the group in power decides that it's more convenient for them to leave power than to stay in power. And that regards many other aspects. One of them is international pressure, international oversight. That's very important. And of course, what we do within the country. But also, it is important to build a group that aspires to power, that has legitimacy and capacity to govern. So we need to address these two big elements so we can go forward into a new democracy. And we have to learn from the errors we did in the past as people. You know, we need to rebuild a project for our nation. And we need to also be very aware that the vision of democracy that we need to build has to be very concrete about quality of life, about security, but with justice and civil rights, and justice with institutions, security with institutions. But not only institutions need to be rebuilt. We need to address, as you know, a progressive movement around the world, we need to build as well a strategy for structural changes. We need to build a strategy to change those big things that they change very slowly over the time, but if we don't do it, we will struggle again and again and again, changing governments, changing institutions, changing laws, but at the end, power itself won't change. So I want to conclude saying that we also, in El Salvador, but in other Latin American countries, we need to know that we are not alone. Authoritarians, they work in networks. They copy each other. They have the same strategies, and we are like stunned watching how the same strategies are all over the continent, all over the region. So why won't we do the same? And I think that this event is so important, and to create networks around not the authoritarians, around what people need to democracy to deliver for their lives. So we need to build that network. We need to copy each other. We need to learn from each other. We need to support each other. And I want you to I want to invite you as well to oversight really close next elections in El Salvador. We're going to have illegal presidential elections and legislative elections, where what people is saying is, yes, I love the president, but I want a balance in the legislative assembly, so power won't be concentrated. So there is a great opportunity in El Salvador to regain, a balance of power and to start rebuilding a democracy. And we need to be as progressive movement. This is my last message in this intervention. We need to be very clear, not just what we are against to. We need to be very clear what we stand for. And that's the main message. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. Okay, we're going to do our Brazilian friends together, and very quickly, 1 minute each. So the 2026 Brazilian elections are going to decide what democracy looks like in the region. And in particular, the subnational elections will decide all 513 federal deputies and 2/3 of the Senate. So, Carol, give us a little bit of a flavor of what's at stake at the subnational level. And then, Dandara, if you can give us a little bit of thoughts, taking into consideration Claudia's note about learning from each other, what lessons should we learn from the fact that Brazil did win back democracy focusing on people? So let's talk about what's at stake for these elections and what lessons we learned in the last election that folks should take into consideration. And then Luisa and Giorgio, we are going to finish with you all on some thoughts of what gives you hope for the region.
Okay, so I'll try to be fast and then pass to Dandara and translate her. So we are talking about the real democratic battle is happening level down the presidential referendum, and it will have longer consequences. As you said, Ali, we have federal deputies, 2/3 of the Senate, governors, and states assemblies across 26 states this year, and these are the people who will control the institutional levels of Brazilian democracy for the next year. So they control state media ecosystem, they political firm judges, they shape local conditions for civic life. And what concerns us most is that the far right understood this years ago, so they have been building this subnational power systematically, as you were saying as well, in municipal councils, in state assemblies, in evangelical networks, and in policy associations. So this is something the progressive field is still catching up, although we've been doing this for a long, long time. We saw the social movements all around Latin America doing this before, but I think we are a lack of investments at the moment. So from a regional perspective, what happens in Brazil, we know that it goes everywhere, and we are the largest democracy in Latin America. So if subnational power consolidates in authoritarian hands, we are not just talking about Brazilian policy, we are talking about a regional model that will be exported, as you said, as well.
Acho que essa é a segunda pergunta, né? Se você quiser acompanhar o texto.
Tá.
Desde os anos 1990, com a disseminação das políticas neoliberais, a ação da extrema-direita ela também é muito pautada no Brasil na desorganização, na desregulamentação dos direitos na nossa sociedade. É a segunda pergunta, as perguntas individuais, o arquivo que eu te mandei.
É, esse aqui mesmo. Vai, pode ir, eu te ajudo.
Tá bom.
We're truly global here, y'all, so thanks for bearing with us.
Não, mas pode continuar.
Tá bom. Mais recente, desde a chegada do Bolsonaro ao poder, o ataque da extrema-direita tem sido às instituições democráticas. Eles se dizem antissistêmicos, mas, na verdade, são anti-instituições democráticas. O ataque mais direcionado é à Suprema Corte do nosso país, que teve um papel fundamental em impedir a tentativa de golpe de Estado em 2023. Hoje, esse ataque está mais vivo do que nunca. Portanto, o que nós aprendemos, e aprendemos muito nas últimas eleições, é a importância de fortalecer as instituições, desde a base da sociedade civil até as mais altas instâncias de poder, travando assim com a extrema-direita uma luta diuturna para que os direitos se consolidem no nosso país. Essa estratégia de deslegitimação das instituições democráticas é a mesma utilizada também em outros países, como é o caso dos Estados Unidos. É uma estratégia que nós devemos encarar com muita responsabilidade nesse momento em que a gente enfrenta eleições. Se não fosse nas últimas eleições a Suprema Corte, a Corte que cuida das eleições, que é o nosso Tribunal Superior Eleitoral, certamente nem as eleições teriam acontecido de forma democrática. Houve uma tentativa de interferir, inclusive, no resultado das urnas.
So Dandara was saying that more recently the attack has been directed primarily at the Supreme Court, which played a fundamental role in preventing the consolidation of the 2023 COP attempt, and that attack is stronger today than ever. So strengthening institutions from the base of civil society to the highest levels of power has been the daily fight of the Brazilian left, and this strategy of institutional delegitimization is the same one used in other countries, including the US, and one response has been to strengthen non-governmental space of power, as I said as well, like territorial councils, municipal policy councils in health, education, and culture.
Thank you. Le damos la última palabra a Luisa. Luisa, ¿qué te da esperanza para la democracia en Latinoamérica? What gives you hope for democracy in Latin America?
Bueno, para comenzar, estos foros son profundamente importantes en la comunicación y la unión de la izquierda y del progresismo. Vemos siempre que la derecha está unida en nuestros países y en el mundo. Tienen un solo eje y se conducen de forma uniforme, mientras la izquierda nos debatimos en ideologías, ¿no? Si eres muy de izquierda, un poco que estás muy en el centro.
Te traduzco. The first thing is convenings like this in unity. The right is unified. They're on one message. And sometimes on the left, we're wondering if you're left enough, if you're not too left, if you can be more left. And unifying behind that feels important.
Y en esa discusión de quién es más de izquierda o menos, hay un avance de la derecha y una pérdida de los derechos de la población.
And while we are debating whether we're left enough, the right advances, but our rights fall to the wayside.
Creo que es el momento de que a la interna de nuestros países y en el mundo dejemos un poco a un lado el interés legítimo de líderes y dirigentes para buscar un proyecto común. En Ecuador se intentó hacer uniendo las izquierdas, es complejo, pero sí se requiere la suma de todos hacia una conducción común que logre también hacer regresar a esa derecha.
So it's time for us to come together. In Ecuador, we were able to do it by building a coalition across the left, and it's what's necessary in order to start rebuilding rights.
Finalmente, en el caso de Ecuador y Latinoamérica, que sería un patio trasero de Estados Unidos, tenemos una arremetida muy fuerte de algo que ya vivimos en la década de los 70s y 80s, que fue el Plan Cóndor, que ahí se lo hizo con dictaduras sangrientas, que lo vivieron Brasil, Uruguay, Argentina, ahora lo hacen con la persecución y proscripción política a través del uso de herramientas judiciales y toma de instituciones.
Latin America has already lived through the bloody consequences of being the backyard of the United States in the 60s and 70s, and today we are experiencing it from a interference in politics and judiciary and legislative systems.
Eso es lo que requiere que países como los que estamos aquí representados, que convenciones y congresos como este se sigan haciendo, pero con una declaración única de apoyo entre nosotros como izquierda y progresismo mundial. Gracias.
That's why we need to not only sit at this table together, but declare our solidarity for this movement.
Okay, I will be very fast because the guy who's in charge is very nervous about us with the time.
We're on Latino time, y'all.
I'm going to run it on this. So, I mean, geopolitically, our countries separately doesn't weight too much in the international context, mostly in Latin America. And we have so much in common. Our language, mostly, with the Portuguese and with other countries that speak, for example, French. But we have so much in common with an colonialist heritage that we should take advantage for having more bonds, more trust among our peoples. So we're living in times where we watch genocide live in our phones. We're living times where inequalities grow while people is in a lockdown, in a pandemic. So we're living times that are very dystopic. But of course, many times before, people have suffered tough times, and this is not the exception. But we have to be together offline, to create some hope. Because without hope, it's like, we don't have like a goal to achieve. And I run this organization that is called the Pan American Congress because 200 years ago, there was the will for making all these new countries, the liberated countries from the region of Las Americas, to be together, and was this meeting called by Simón Bolívar 200 years ago in Panama, and that's why the Pan American idea started. After that, like 50 years after that, the U.S. took this Pan American idea, but under the Monroe Doctrine. So we run this little organization that tries to gather Pan-American legislators, progressive in the wide sense of the progressism, all the different forces, the diversity, for putting like best practices, success stories of legislations or some political processes that are inspiring for other people, and try to create some bonds among our continent. You know that the continent has many potentialities, but if we act separately, it's impossible to achieve the goals that we have. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much to our panelists. We invite you to stay in this room for a training on leadership and your political journey with our friends from Better Politics.
Thank you.
Gracias.